guys, Justin Freeman here with Freeman Rail Productions, and I'm very happy to tell you that we are back for episode number 3 of Anthems with the Iron Horse. Now, for those of you that haven't seen our first 2 episodes, this is a series about historic railroading. Now, our first 2 episodes were highlighting equipment. This episode, however, is going to be a little bit different. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the historic field through the eyes of a teenage railroader. So therefore, I'm going to be titling this episode Memoirs of a Teenage Railroader. Now what that means is that you're going to get to hear my story along with some videos, some audio, and even a bunch of embarrassing photos that I can't believe I'll be posting on the internet. Now, before we can get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, as I like to say, I do have a couple of announcements. First of all, our big film, Love for the Trade, has been indefinitely postponed. I do apologize for those of you looking forward to either starring in it or viewing it. It has just been a very tough semester, so that will hopefully come by the end of the summer. Over the summer, I am still hoping to put out a few different videos on historic railroading equipment, but for now, we're just going to have to forget about our big movie. So with that being said, let's get into the main subject of our episode. Yours truly, the memoir of a teenage railroader. So like I said, this is mainly going to be about my story, how I got involved in historic railroading, and even later on in the video, a few tips about how you can get involved in historic railroading as well. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Justin Freeman. I am 19 years old and I am from a small town called Rossville, Georgia, outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I have been involved in railroading for the last 8 years of my life, since I was 11. But my history with the railroad goes back much, much further, just as I'm sure most of you in the audience are. My start in railroading goes all the way back to 2006, when I was just a young lad at the age of around a year old. And it was exactly where you thought it would be, the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. When I was a year old, my grandmother won tickets to attend the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's Day Out with Thomas event. Now, I'm not ashamed to say we went to that event a number of times. And when I say a number of times, we were out there a lot. Here's a few photos of me through the years. As you can tell, I was a Thomas kid. Now, Day Out with Thomas was not my only love for the railroad. Another reason why I fell so deeply in love with railroading is my grandfather, John Freeman, started out as a switchman on the Southern Railway in 1980. In 1982, he would be laid off. He'd later be rehired by Norfolk Southern on the extra board, making his way up to a regular conductor and a regular engineer, retiring in 2017. So for most of my life, railroading has been relevant. Now, with that being said, I didn't really get to do much with my grandfather because, that's Norfolk Southern. So a lot of my experience came from the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Now, we would attend Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's Day Out with Thomas from around 2006 up until, I believe, 2011 or 2012. I got to an age where my parents thought I was getting too old to go. But in 2013, with the appearance of Southern Railway number 630 on the main line and things like that, I started getting involved with Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's Railfest. Now, I would attend Railfest from 2013 every year until 2018, when it would unfortunately end, but we'll talk more about my later Railfests later in the video. But Railfest was a way for me to get out and see more of the historic railroading industry. I would get to go out and watch the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum for a whole day. I'd get to ride the local as much as I wanted to, and I would get to see my favorite steam locomotive, the 630, in operation in those early days. I did end up getting to take a couple of mainline trips with the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. I went from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Cleveland, Tennessee twice, behind both engines, behind the 630 and the 4501. Now I think my favorite rail fest of all time was indefinitely in 2014 when the 4501 came out of the shops. I should have a picture of myself at that rail fest. I remember that. My biggest memory was when the 4501 was being restored. I would go out every few weeks to see the locomotive, to see how it was progressing. And I will never forget the day that I drove down that driveway at Grand Junction, and there the locomotive was in full steam, living and breathing, just as she was designed to do. It almost brings a tear to my eye to think about that, because that was just such a happy memory. Because before that time, and I'm getting off on a little bit of a sidetrack here, my family had no involvement with the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. I think maybe in 1989 my dad went out and rode the local at the school trip, but other than that, there was no involvement with the Freemans in the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. So that was my first time getting to see the 4501 under steam. And that's really when my love for the Tennessee Valley Railroad and historic railroading began to truly develop. Now that love would continue to develop over the next 2 years. I would get to go to Railfest in 2015 and ride the 4501 on the main line. And then in the winter of 2015, or the early year of 2016, I was given the opportunity to sign up for Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's Rail Camp. Now Rail Camp is a program which lets students from the age of around 6 years old all the way up to 17 years old go out and experience a week on the railroad. Now I would always do the day camps, which meant I would go in at 8 a.m. and I get to go home at 5 p.m. Let me tell you, Rail Camp was my favorite week of the year. I met some of my best friends at Rail Camp, such as Consolidation Productions, Matthew Freer, Zane Williams, Matthew Lassiter, Paul Trumpor, and a bunch of other great guys through Rail Camp. And it was really my friendship with Matthew which allowed me to begin getting involved with the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. You see, Matthew and I built a very strong friendship very, very quickly. It's actually kind of humorous how our friendship began. Our rail camp counselor, the head counselor, Trevor, would allow us to bring our own locomotives in to run on a little model railroad. And Matthew brought his cheap little Bachman in, and I said, oh, if you're bringing the Bachman, I'll bring the smoke fluid, as I had a few Bachman locomotives at the house, and I had a lot of Lionel, and I used Bachman smoke fluid at the time. So I brought my smoke fluid out, and we thought it was I had never ran HO with smoke fluid, so I put, instead of putting a couple drops in, I would squeeze the bottle real hard, and I put so much smoke fluid in it that I would actually burn a hole in the side of his smoke box. So the next day I came in with about $30 and paid him for the locomotive, and I'll never forget his dad, Steve Freer, who's in marketing and operations at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, would come to me and tell me I overpaid. And anyways, long story short, Matthew and I developed a very good friendship after that. We're still very good friends to this day. I try to talk to him at least once a week. But Matthew and his dad would invite me to come with them to work at one of their Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's events known as Erie Express. I would begin that in 2016. And the Erie Express was one of my favorite times of the year because I was actually working for the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. I would get to come out and, just experience the love and the romance of the museum through the eyes of a volunteer. Now, although I say I was a volunteer, I was a very loose volunteer, meaning that I usually have my camera around my hip while I was there. But that's beside the point. I did start volunteering with the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum in 2016. Now, I would continue to do rail camp and volunteer at Erie Express in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Now, along with that, in 2017, I would also get to volunteer for the Erie Express, or not the Erie Express, Railfest, and I would also get to volunteer at events like Day Out with Thomas and the North Pole Limited. And I began working every big event that the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museums had. And throughout this time of me volunteering, the staff got to get to know me. I started meeting guys out there like Travis Gordon, Bo Ellis, and a few other really, really great guys who I'll talk about a little later in the video. But the staff started to get to know me. They began to recognize me. In fact, one of my favorite co-workers today, Jonathan Shields, we always talk about when I used to come out and ride the train, I was a regular, and I would always just ask. I would stand right in the front of the crowd and make sure to ask a question when I could. But yeah, long story short, the staff began to get to know me. And that's what really started building that relationship between myself and the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Now I gotta say, the lowest point in my childhood was in 2020 when the museum was shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I was shattered. I went from March 6th to, I believe, June or July without getting to see any kind of railroading. And it was kind of rough because railroading was a big part of my life at this time. And it still is today, but we'll get into that later. But I didn't get to see my happy place for that long, and it was heartbreaking. But everything was fine and dandy when it came to June of 2020. I finally got to go out and see the 4501 in operation. Here are a couple of pictures of it, that first weekend of it running again. And here is a clip that is my favorite clip of all time from TVRM. The turntable had not been ran in quite some time. So in the 4501 was imbalanced on the turntable, and it was actually getting stuck about a quarter of the way through the revolution. So here's a video of them using the Daewoo, or the large military forklift, to get the locomotive started.
Poor Trevor. Hey, get back.
Like I said, that's one of my favorite clips, and I think my favorite part is when you can hear Steve Freer, who was the tour guide on the trip, say, "Oh, here we go, here we go." Aww. But yeah, that was one of my happiest days of 2020. That was my limelight. And after that, I began going to the museum again regularly to see the 01 operate and to just hang out with my friends. I chased just about every steam Chickamauga turn they ran that year, and I kept volunteering at the events that they would let me. Now everything changed for me on November 14th of 2020. I went out to help decorate for North Pole Limited, and I was handed a piece of paper. Now at this time I was 15 years old enough to become a paid employee. And I don't remember who it was. It might have been Steve Freer, came up to me and handed me a job application and said, "Justin, you're here enough, you might as well be getting paid for it." So I filled that out as quick as I could and brought it right back to the museum. And on November 17th of 2023, I finally became a paid employee at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. I'll never forget, about 2 weeks later, I got my first paycheck from TVRM, and that was truly awe-inspiring. Somewhere that I had loved since I was little began to give me a paycheck. I was a car host on the North Pole Limited that winter, and that was one of the best jobs of my life. I didn't care if the hours were long. I didn't care if it was a lot of work. All I cared about was I was there at my happy place, getting paid to be there. And it was just such a mind-boggling event, and it's still mind-boggling to me that I get to do that. But I would work from November to late December on the North Pole Limited, and then I thought I wouldn't get to work again until the following December. That is, until my good friend, a conductor, and a former co-worker of my grandfather's on the Southern and the Norfolk Southern Railway, Dave Johnston, called me one day, and he said, "Justin, Bob Ralph, our dining car steward, is looking for more servers." And I told him you would be the perfect person. That led to me emailing Bob Ralph and calling him and getting a job on the dining car. And in February of 2021, I became a dining car server and a part-time employee of the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. I was there every week and every weekend getting paid to be there. When I told you that getting paid just to be there a little bit was mind-boggling thing about every week getting paid to be there and getting to be in my happy place. So I would begin to work on the dining car, but I kept seeing the local go by every day, and I was like, that is where I really want to be. So I got in contact with one of our road foremen at the museum, Zach Gilmore, and I got myself a job as a tour guide on the Missionary Res Local. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I sucked as a tour guide for the first month or so, and I had to really get into it. But after the summer was over, I felt pretty confident as a tour guide, and I still give tours at the museum today. Now, because I was 16 years old at the time, I couldn't be a conductor, trainman, or anything like that, or in train and engine service. So I continued through 2021, alternating my weekends, or actually alternating shifts during the day. I would work the local from about 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Then I'd switch from the local to the dinner train and work that evening. And let me tell you, those were some of the best Saturdays of my life. I get to spend the whole day out on the railroad, and it was absolutely a blast. But unfortunately, I felt like the dining car was becoming I'm a very spiritual person. I believe that was not where the Lord wanted me to be. I didn't really fit in well on the dining car. So in about May of 2022, after a little over a year working on the dining car, I would put in my 2 weeks application, or my 2 weeks resignation, and I would no longer be a dining car server. Now that doesn't mean I quit from the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Like I've told you before, I still work out there. I would switch all of my hours over to being on the local, and I was tour guide practically every weekend, and in the summer I was on the train every week. And let me tell you, that was a blast. I absolutely love working the local. To some it may seem tedious, but to me it is truly enjoyable. Just being out on the railroads, playing choo-choos all day is what I love to do. Now, at this time I'm 17, so for the entire year of 2023 or 22, I'm just itching to get my hands dirty and to become a trainman. And on February 18th of 2023, I finally got my chance. After about a month and 13 days of waiting, I finally got everything through, got all my classroom hours out of the way, and I became a brakeman trainee. And let me tell you, that was some of the hardest learning I've ever had to do, but it was also some of the most fun learning. I got to learn how to couple, uncouple, lace air hoses, and to work on the equipment. It was an absolute blast. And my work would pay off. After only about 6 months of being a brakeman trainee, I was marked up or qualified as a brakeman, and that's the level I'm still at today. Now, I say I'm at the brakeman level, but I do have all of my hours, my classroom hours and my operations hours, which is about 40 to 48 hours of classroom time, and 200, which I have about 700 hours to become a conductor. So all I need now is something called a check ride or a qualifying ride, which is where my road foreman comes out and rides to guarantee that I am fit to be a conductor. Once I get that check ride, I will be a conductor at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Now, looking ahead into the future with my story at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, I believe that the Lord built me to be a railroader. Now, that doesn't mean I want to go work for some Class 1 or some short line. I want to work for a museum. I love the history behind the equipment. I love working on the equipment. Therefore, I believe I was built to be a historic railroader, and that's exactly what I plan to do. I plan to go full-time once I graduate from ABAC at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, and I plan to work there until my dying day. There is no better place than the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. And that's my story. You've learned a little bit about me, and now I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about how you can be just like I did and get into historic railroading. Alright, so in order to become a historic railroader, from a historic railroader's perspective, I do have 3 tips for you folks. The number one and probably the most important tip to becoming a historic railroader or involved in anything really is to build a positive reputation. Like I told you, I started volunteering with the organization. I made myself known and I made myself a positive reputation. People were excited to see me at the museum. They didn't think, oh, he's here again. At least I don't think they did. It was more along the lines of, oh, there's Justin, or things like that. You want to build yourself a positive reputation. That way, when people think about your name, they think positive thoughts. A positive reputation will get you anywhere in this life. So number one is to build yourself a positive reputation. Now rule number two, or not rule, I should say tip number two for those of you looking to get into historic railroading, is very simple. Find yourself a role model. Now I told you earlier that we would come back to a few names with the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum that I found as role models. And honestly, this is going to take a minute. Some of my biggest role models at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum are my older brother, as I like to call him, Travis Gordon, my older sister Ricky Durden and her husband Andrew Durden, Zach Langley, who is my best friend in the world, Bo Ellis, Frank Welsh, Joseph Randall, Andrew Walker, Tyler Chipman, Zach Gilmore, Ryan Miller, Jody Brantley, and ultimately the late George Walker. All of them have been or were very, very influential people in my railroading career. Each of them took me under their wings and taught me a little bit about railroading, and they're the reasons that I am the railroader I am today. Now, I can't take enough time to thank these people for what they've done in my career. They showed an investment into me, and they showed me what a good mentor is. Now, not only have they become mentors to me, they have also become more of friends. They've become my family as well. Another gentleman I did not mention, but who's also been just as influential in my railroading career, is a gentleman by the name of Brian Hunt, or Magic H, as we like to call him at the museum, as well as Jason Fields. All of these folks have just really, really just touched my life and touched my career and helped me to become a better railroader. And other than that, they're just great people. Everybody at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum has made sure to show me just what a good railroader is. One of the earliest examples of this was Jonathan Shields, one of our tour guides and ultimately a trainman and conductor at the museum. Jonathan went above and beyond to talk to me every time he sees me. In 2021, my grandmother would pass away, and he was one of the people that made me laugh the most that year. So I can't say enough about these people, and that just goes to show you to find yourself a good group of friends and a good mentor. That's going to be your key to success in railroading, is finding that good mentor and finding somebody that will take you under their wing. And finally, rule number 3 is to get your name out there and go volunteer. Find yourself your local railroad museum. I don't care if they don't run equipment. I don't care if they have 100 miles of track or a mile of track. Get out there and get your name out. I've been very blessed to have gotten my name out very early on in railroading, and I've created many friends all over the nation because of it. And that, it's hard for me to say it, but just get out there and get involved. Even if you can't volunteer, find yourself a summer camp or things like that you can attend, and that will get you into historic railroading. I can't tell you enough about just how influential those 3 tips were in my career, and I hope they can be influential in yours. So those were my 3 tips to get you into historic railroading. And that will just about conclude episode 3 of Anthems with the Iron Horse, Memoir of a Teenage Railroader. I do want to thank you all so much for watching. One thing I will say, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. I know that this might not be the highest quality content, but I try to put something out that's either educational or entertaining. So I hope you guys have enjoyed episode number 3. Now, I do want to take a minute, again, just to thank the people that have been influential in my railroading career. I can't thank enough the people that I mentioned as my mentors. Everybody that I mentioned, they have just been so influential in my career, and I would not be the man that I am today without them. I also want to thank my parents for their unconditional love and support, and I want to thank each and every one of you for viewing and helping out grow this channel. You make a young railroader proud to be a young railroader. Thank you all so much for riding with us, and until next time, board, let's go.